G'day, Chris here and welcome back to ClickSpring. A number of requests over the last few weeks have centred around how to go about setting up a home machine shop. What are the essential tools to buy and in what order should they be purchased? Well, it's a very big subject and I think it's fair to say that everyone is going to approach this differently. So take what I'm about to say as a sort of rough guide, but don't hesitate for a second to adapt it to suit your own situation. Okay, so before we start, here's a quick overview of my shop. I have 4 basic machine tools that I consider to be the core of the shop. That's the lathe, the mill, the horizontal bandsaw and the bench grinder. Now there are a number of accessories required to make both the lathe and the mill usable. And there's a small amount of essential metrology and marking out gear required, stuff that every shop needs to have as a bare minimum. There's a collection of what I'd broadly describe as the essential hand tools. And finally, something I don't often mention is the library of magazines and books that I've built up, which I also consider to be an essential part of the shop. Now on the periphery of this shop core are all of the nice to have tools that without a doubt make life in the shop not only easier, but also a lot more fun. For now though, I'm excluding those tools and keeping the discussion to just the essentials. The other tools are certainly worth considering at some point, but they can definitely wait until you've locked down the rest. Because the strategy I recommend is to start small and then build the shop in discrete stages. Get the key machine tools and the bare minimum accessories to be productive, and then slowly accumulate the rest of the shop over time in response to the projects that you take on. So in effect, the projects themselves become the driver behind future tool purchases. And importantly, also the driver for the tools that you choose to make for yourself. Because as the shop develops and grows, you'll become increasingly independent of the tool retailers and further able to bootstrap the shop development using what you already have. You can make something like, for example, this large fly cutter that exactly suits your needs that simply isn't available for purchase anywhere else. That tool gets used along with everything else to make more tools, and on it goes until you've got the shop equipped exactly the way that you want it. Okay, so where's a good place to start? Well, no matter what you choose to make in the shop, a large proportion of your time is going to be spent making parts with turned features. So unless you've got a really good reason to go with a mill first, a lathe is almost certainly going to be the logical first purchase. Now, which lathe in particular is itself a huge topic, and I'm going to cover that in detail in the next TGT. But no matter which lathe you decide on, you'll need at least a few extras before you can start to get the very best out of it. Most lathes come with a 3 and 4 jaw chuck, a follow-on steady rest and a faceplate. But you'll also want to immediately consider a drill chuck, a live and dead centre and a quick change tool post. If a mill is still outside the budget for the foreseeable future, then maybe also consider a vertical slide and vise so that you can take care of some of the small milling jobs on the lathe cross slide. And of course, you'll also need some lathe tools. Now, as you've probably noticed, I use high-speed steel and shop-hardened carbon steel almost exclusively for my lathe tools. I do use insert tooling from time to time when I really need it, but by and large I find high-speed steel and carbon steel to be more versatile. I can fully customise the tool to any required shape, and I find it better suited to the scale of work that I do. But of course that means the shop needs tool number 2, a bench grinder. Generally, they're not overly expensive and usually come with a fine and coarse wheel already installed. The high-speed steel blanks can be bought from most tool suppliers, and there's a number of excellent videos on YouTube showing how to freehand grind lathe tools. I'll put some links in the post below. One thing this tool requires though is a second isolated area away from the main shop to ensure that the grinding dust doesn't drift onto the lathe bed. Now, it doesn't need to be anywhere special, just so long as it's not inside the actual shop. Okay, so at this point you're off and running and you've got your own machine shop. And if you've hit the budget limit, then the shop can stay at this first stage indefinitely, without issue. You can start making some of the tools that you'll need, like drawbars, chuck keys and so on, have some fun and slowly accumulate some more of the accessories over time. But one interesting thing about machining is that while a lot of time is spent forming profiles, it's also largely about making holes, and lots of them. Some small, some large, some tapped, and almost all of them required to be exactly where you need them to be. Now, to some extent, these holes can be formed on a lathe, but when the budget permits, eventually you're going to want to think about getting either a drill press or, I think the better option, of one of the benchtop mill drills. Now again, selecting one is a big subject, and I'll cover it in detail in a separate video. But much like a lathe, no matter which one you choose, there's a couple of extra bits and pieces you'll need to consider to make it useful. The machines tend to come with a basic clamping kit and a drill chuck. But you'll immediately want to consider a decent vise, some parallels, an edge finder and wiggler, and some way to securely hold the cutting tools. I use ER32 collets in a collet chuck, and I selected a number 3 Morse taper for both my mill and the lathe spindles, so that the collet chuck would be interchangeable between both machines. That way I could use the one set of collets across the shop. Now things like gauge blocks, sine bars and the various setup blocks are all nice to have, but don't hurry to get those just yet, they're not that urgent. Wait for them to come up on special or second hand and get a better deal. But you will need to get some cutting tools right away, and this point is worth emphasising. With cutting tools, you definitely get what you pay for. So whenever the budget allows, be sure to buy only professional grade cutting tools. Basically the same brands that your local machine shop would use. A good quality set of small increment high speed steel drill bits like this, and a small selection of end mills will be enough to get you started. And then buy only the pro stuff individually as the projects call for them. It will be more expensive than the import box sets that you see online. But over time, you'll accumulate a quality set of cutting tools that'll not only last longer, but also bring out the best in your machines. Okay, now you're really humming along, and you can take on a huge range of projects in your ever-expanding shop. But of course, you need to be able to mark out and measure what you're doing. So you'll need to consider a 1-inch range micrometer, calipers, a dial indicator, and also a dial test indicator. Now the brand name versions of these are definitely superior to the imports, but they are expensive. So hold out for a good sale price and be on the lookout for good second-hand deals too. A quality reference surface will be required at some point. And a digital height gauge would be nice to have, but it can probably wait. In fact, I still haven't got around to getting one. Instead, I use this old school height gauge on a surface plate along with a square, straight edge and dividers, and it's rare that I hit any problems. Now hand tools are going to be specific to the sort of work that you want to do, and of course a lot of them can be shop made. But for the more general tools, most of what I have is import grade, and I'd say quite okay to get the job done. A bench vise is a must at some point, and if you happen to be setting up for clockmaking, then eventually you're going to need a range of needle files and abrasive stones. Much like the cutting tools, avoid the cheap stuff. Be sure to buy only Swiss-made Grobet files and Norton abrasive stones. You won't need a full range all at once, so a small selection of stones and tri-cut files will do for the start, and the rest can be accumulated over time. And finally, there's one more machine tool to consider for the initial setup. It's probably the first step beyond the essential list, but using a hacksaw to cut off raw stock gets tired really quickly, especially in the heat of summer. So if there's any way you can swing it within the budget, then be sure to get a horizontal bandsaw. It cuts down the stock preparation time enormously, and it can also work in the upright position, so it's sort of a cheap upright bandsaw too, with a few limitations. Okay, now I mentioned books and magazines at the start of the video, and even though I've left it to the end to talk about them, they're probably the most important first purchase of all, because it's knowledge that lets us bring out the best in our tools. I watch a lot of YouTube videos to learn new techniques, and the internet is truly a great resource, no doubt about it. But it's from books and magazines like these that I get a really deep understanding of how and why things are done the way they are. Now, Machinery's Handbook is a given, but if you're looking for a really accessible introduction to some of the more technical subjects, then I definitely recommend the Workshop Practice series of books. Just select the topics about which you'd like to learn more, and you can build up a really good reference library tailored to your specific shop interests. There's also the classic model engineering texts from the greats like George Thomas and the English Tubal-Cain. All full of hard-won experience and knowledge, and brimming with terrific project ideas to get you started. And if you're into clockmaking, then no clock workshop is complete without these essential books on horology. And I think that nicely rounds out the shop setup. With this small library and the initial tools that I've just covered, you've got the core of a decent home machine shop in place. It won't have cost you an arm and a leg, and you can continue to build on it as time and dollars permit. Now, as I said at the start, everyone's approach to this will be different. and I'd love for this post to be a sort of resource for everyone to exchange ideas and share their own experiences. So be sure to leave your thoughts and advice in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.